The first time I encountered Jeff Harry was on a podcast about Ted Lasso. So, of course, I was super, super thrilled about that. And because the podcast happened to be with my friend Dimple, who has also been on the podcast last year, I knew that I needed to talk to Jeff, not just because it was a podcast about Ted Lasso, but because when Jeff talks about positive psychology and the power of play, I just find myself standing and going, amen, amen, and all the things that we talk about here on Joyosity. So if you are new to the Joyosity podcast, welcome. I'm so glad you're joining us. If you're a seasoned leader or you're really just starting out, you belong here in the Joyosity community. And as a reminder, we base everything we do here on 3 bedrock beliefs. True leadership requires more than just surface level strategies. It requires a profound connection to everything that makes us human. And 2, using genuine curiosity, we can create positive culture with all those complex people that make work suck, and we can do it if we are curious. And that 3, joy is the heartbeat of a healthy leader and a healthy organization. So we're putting joy and fun right in the center of all our work. And every week on Joyosity, we bring you dynamic conversations with experts and leaders sharing not just a couple tips, but really the hard-won wisdom that will help you lead. So I'm Jen Whitmer, international speaker, leadership consultant, all-around joy bringer, hosting you and guiding us along. And together, my hope is that we move from just the ideas that you're hearing into really action and embracing the challenges that come with leading in a dynamic yet imperfect world. So just be sure you're ready for that, like, oh, I can do that right now, or the kind of gasp, ouch, and amen, deep insight that's really going to transform you, not only as a leader, but also as a person. So get yourself ready. Multiple beverages always welcome. Get your ear pods ready, maybe some Post-it notes, because we are going to dive in with Jeff Harry. So before I bring Jeff on, just a little bit about him. He has been facilitating and doing work of infusing play and positive psychology into working with teams for 15 years. He has been on NPR. He has been inside the NFL and Amazon and one of my favorites, NPR. And he really brings an amazing perspective that I think is incredibly powerful. And so I couldn't wait to bring him on. And so let's welcome Jeff.
What's up?
So glad that you are here
So
with
excited,
your trademark,
so joyful.
Your trademark Lego bow tie, which is one of my favorite things.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. So if you are new to the podcast, we always start with like, what's your story?
Yeah.
And so how did you, you've been doing this work in positive psychology and play for 15 years. You're one of the top 100 HR influencers. Help us place you in, how did you get here?
Yeah. So my Batman origin story, that's what I was bring up.
That's what we want.
Did you ever see the movie Big with Tom Hanks?
Oh, I love Big. We watch it usually around Christmas.
Yeah. So yeah, I still do too. So I saw it in 3rd grade. And in that movie, he gets to play with toys for a living.
Yeah.
So I saw that and I was like, you can play with toys for a living? and he basically went to FAO Schwartz and danced on the piano, and then someone offered him a job. So I did that. I went in 3rd grade and I went and danced on the piano, and nobody offered me a job. Very false advertising.
9-year-old crushed.
I know. And then I went home and I started writing toy companies on my word processor. And I kept writing them, I don't know, for like 15 years. And most of the time they thought like I was an adult because I was typing them out. But I eventually got into the toy industry after all of like writing these letters. Like, I'm a kid, I have ideas. I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted, but then been so disappointed when you got there. But I got in the toy industry and there was no toys, no fun, no high fives, no joy, no play, right? Very surface level leadership style. Yeah, I was like, I had like a quarter life crisis. I was like, what am I going to do? So I left New York. I came to the San Francisco Bay Area, and I bumped into a job on such a safe site known as Craigslist. No Craigslist, but yeah, usually you get furniture in a dark alleyway on Craigslist. But you also get weird jobs. And I found a job teaching kids engineering with Lego.
Mm.
And it was only 7 people at the time, but they were just playing with Lego for a living. And we took it from 7 people to 400 people. And we built it was the largest Lego inspired STEM organization in the US.
That's amazing.
And so I built our whole HR department. I built our whole events department, our whole marketing department. We were just making stuff up. We had no idea what we were doing. We picked cities we thought were fun. We picked people we thought were fun, but we were just playing. We were just making it up. But because we were having such fun, it started attracting not only like us teaching kids, because I think we taught like 100,000 kids a year, but then companies started being like, hey, do you do anything with us? Could you like run our team building stuff? So then I ran team building for all the top tech companies in the Bay Area, because I was in Oakland for like 10 years. And I realized, even as we were running these fun events for these companies that are considered the best in the world, not fun. Not the most psychologically safe work environments, right? Like super toxic. So I created Rediscover Your Play basically in 2019, 2020 with my first workshop called Dealing with A-Holes in the Workplace Through Play, because I was like, I just wanted to make up workshops that challenged power, that challenged patriarchy, that challenged why work sucks so much. And ever since then, yeah, I've basically been traveling around US, Canada, other parts of the world, just speaking and getting an understanding, especially in the HR world, of like why people think work sucks so much and how it doesn't have to.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to. I think that's the thing that I talk about a lot, is that we resign ourselves to like, this is what work is, when really it does not have to be that way.
Yeah.
You don't have to have cornflakes without sugar on them. Like you actually can.
You can sprinkle it on there. It's great.
Can sprinkle it on. I mean, moderation is a thing, but it doesn't have to be bland. So I just love that story. I actually didn't know that you started in the toy industry. That's super fun. I mean, I knew a little bit about the Lego story, but I love that you were really just big. That is phenomenal. So, you've done this work around play. You talk about a lot about positive psychology. Well, give us a little bit of just a quick, tiny little baby primer, so we have somewhere to go when we talk about what is positive psychology, psychological safety in the workplace. What is that?
Yeah, so the professor Marty Seligman created positive psychology back in like the early 80s. And the reason why he created it was psychology up until that point had only studied what was wrong with people. So he was just like, well, what's right with people? How can we?
What is not in the DSM-5?
Exactly. What can we double down on that's really good? So when you think of positive psychology, you think of like, what are your strengths and how do we double down on those strengths, right? How do we savor more? How do we have more empathy? How do we sit in compassion more, right? How do we spend more times celebrating, and how does gratitude actually impact your work? How does joy impact your work? How are you measuring that in all of what you do? Right. There's this whole thing called PERMA V that breaks down like vitality and, all these different important concepts that are crucial to just having a really lovely life. Because when they talk about in positive psychology, they study a ton around centenarians and how there are these blue zones in like Okinawa and randomly Costa Mesa and in Sardinia of people that have living over 100 years. And you're like, why? Why are these people? Because of how they are. How are they connected to their family? Do they have purpose, right? Like, how much joy is written into each day? How many connections do they have? And how many quality connections, quality friendships? All of this stuff matters. And I think a lot of times we tiptoe around it because it doesn't fit the typical like capitalistic, like go, go, go culture.
Yes.
That actually is really destroying the workplace, in my opinion.
I would agree. And that idea behind, we have a corporate culture that was really is not that old. We think this is how it's always been done, but really 150, 250 years ago, everything was very interconnected. Your family, your friends, your community, your work was really in service of the community. And
Mhm.
now we have a global system where we physically as humans can't connect with the globe. There's debate on how many close friends you can have, but it's somewhere between 50 and 150 depending on who you listen to. So like who we think that this is the way work is, when actually it's really like 30, 50 years old.
Yeah.
This like super rigid capitalistic profit
Yeah.
productivity at all cost. So one of the things that I love about what you talk about is that, well, we said, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
What do you help people, like, let's just right now talk to the cynic, either in the back of the room or the
Yeah.
cynic inside their own heads. Like, but I'm supposed to get stuff done. Like, how does empathy and play help me get stuff done? Like, isn't that, I'm not really supposed to be doing that. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, that's a great question. People get work done when they feel seen, heard, appreciated, and valued.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing about that? That's one of the biggest questions I always ask leaders. Like, how are you making sure your staff feel seen, heard, and appreciated? I was just helping out on a consulting call earlier that day or earlier today, and someone was saying, he's like, listen, I will work even more as long as I know that you're supporting me. As
Yeah.
long as you're helping to find the staff and the resources so I can do my job, then I'm down. But once
Mm-hmm.
I know you're not, or once I know that you're like kind of gaslighting me and letting me know maybe I'll get you some help in the future, or maybe I'll get you that raise in the future, when you're constantly doing that, my morale is going to drop dramatically. And
Yeah.
if you think about leaders right now, the leaders that are celebrated, the toxic leaders, the Elon Musk, the Jeff
Mm,
Bezos, Mark Zuckerbergs, heck, even the Steve Jobs, right? Lack of empathy,
yeah.
lack of compassion, not psychologically safe. And when you look at a company like Twitter's now X, right? Is that a safe company? Is there any good ideas coming from that? You know, you know, I talk a ton about how uh, organizations that have empathy and compassion and psychological safety create an environment where then people share their best ideas, right?
Yes.
And a great example of this, I was telling someone about this earlier today. Cisco Systems
Uh-huh.
has this web platform called WebEx, right? It's their Zoom platform.
I'm only giggling because, yeah, I've been
You
on a
know where
WebEx.
this is going. Yeah, you know where it's going, right? Like, oh, WebEx, who uses WebEx, right?
Uh,
Well, one of the main people that helped develop WebEx was like, well, I have a better idea. We'd have to rebuild this entire platform in order to do it, but it would create more connection on calls. And Cisco was like, nah, we don't want to do that. And they just did totally ignore that guy. He's like, well, I'm going to make it on my own. And they're like, okay, whatever. He made Zoom,
Right.
right? So, and then WebEx became irrelevant. And this happens with the Blockbuster, with the Netflix story.
Totally.
It happens over and over again because
Mhm.
you haven't created a safe place where people feel that their ideas are valued and they are valued, right?
And
So,
that extends to customers too. So, like
right,
in the Blockbuster Netflix example, the whole Blockbuster, their moneymaker wasn't actually renting videos. If you're too old to remember what Blockbuster was, it was a store you went to actually rent
yep,
VHS and then discs. And then maybe some Blu-rays before they started to close. But their whole business model was really perpetrated on shame, which was
yes,
if you show up late with your video, we're going to charge you $1 or something
yes,
like that. I mean, I remember booking it the mile and a half in my 82
yes,
Cutlass Supreme to get there before I was going to get charged $1 for renting big. So it's that extended from their internal culture into their entire business model. And also when Netflix came and said, hey, we don't have the infrastructure, we'd like to partner with you, they laughed them out of the office.
$10 million. They could have bought them for $10 million.
Yeah, they laughed him out of the office. So there's so many business outcomes that come from people being seen, heard, and valued.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful.
And I'll even double down on the play aspect, right? There's an author known as Stephen Johnson who would always say, the future is where people are having the most fun.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you think of the organizations taking the biggest risk during the pandemic, Hulu, TikTok, heck, even Netflix at one point, you know, those organizations were the ones that were thriving. Meanwhile, like Sears, you know, organizations like not taking risks, right?
Yeah.
Not being bold. Heck, even Amazon at one point back in 99 was the place to be because they were solving the most interesting tech issues in the world. So all the tech people wanted to be there. That's how it got cultivated. And then he became Lex Luthor, and then it all went downhill from there. But at some point, like if you think about your industry, which company or organization in your industry is having the most fun, is taking the most risks? They're not having a retention problem, right? They're not having issues that you potentially are having at your company from psychological safety, retention, burnout, all the stuff, because they're creating a playground for people to play and try cool new stuff. Yeah. That's a place I want to be at. Right.
So last night I went to the Charles A. and Ann Morrow Lindbergh Foundation. Get the right words out. And we got invited. We are friends with the graphic designer who's doing all of their graphics. And we didn't really know what we were going to. He invited us. He's a fun person. So again, following the fun, and showed up. And they have this uber exciting idea to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Charles Lindbergh's flight in St. Louis. So Lindbergh is a huge thing here in my hometown. Well, where I live now. My hometown is Kansas City, but anyway. And we went with like, okay, what are we going to? We're going to go see Brad. But when we left after, like, they were so excited. What they were doing to partner with all of these SpaceX and other big ideas at the Centennial and the Paris Paris Aviation Show. I'm clearly not an aviator. And I was like, this is exciting because we really leaned in. And the thing I got the most excited about as a former teacher was that they have partnered with the Lindbergh School District here in St. Louis to build a facility that helps kids play in the science aspect on an old farm that they've built, and like a geothermal space. But it's a really intentional curriculum all the way through. And because kids are going to learn as well, when there is like, oh, what could we do? When you were like, oh, what could we do? That exciting question is where people are having fun and they solve better problems.
And that's where the innovation comes from.
Yes.
The best ideas come from play. All the greatest inventions came from play. I talk about this a ton, how a lot of people know the Wright brothers, but they don't know Samuel Pierpont Langley. Pierpont Langley was someone that was competing with the Wright brothers for the first flying apparatus, right? And he had, I think, $5 million in back funding from the government. He had access to scientists from the Smithsonian. So why he had all the resources that these two bike mechanics out of Ohio didn't have. So why did he not accomplish it? Ego. Not psychologically safe. Everyone thinking about like who's going to take credit, and also not willing to deal with failure, right? Ooh. They crashed their plane twice and then they gave up. Yeah. Meanwhile, the Wright brothers are crashing their plane in North Carolina like so many times that it's entertaining. People just come out just to watch. Don't talk to them. But at some point they started to be like, well, these people are kind of cool, right? And I don't think we realize the level of innovations that come. I love that you live in St. Louis, because one of my favorite play places in the world is in St. Louis, City Museum.
City Museum. It is the best.
And if you ever go to the City Museum, if anyone's in St. Louis, you need to go. right?
Yes.
We also need to get emos, but we'll talk about that. That's a whole
I'm going to disagree
other,
on that. They might kick me out of St. Louis for
oh,
it,
we could have this
but I'm
debate.
not here for the emos.
Yeah, that's a whole, yeah, we'll get into that. We should have a whole podcast just on that pizza.
Let me
It's
stay
really
St. Louis, please.
very emotional, St. Louis, with your showbiz pizza. But yeah, but at City Museum, when you talk to the builders,
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating just to listen. They're just making stuff all the time. They're constantly in this creative mode. And how this ties into your work is you can tell they're in their flow.
Yes.
When someone's in their flow, they are 5 times more productive.
Yes.
That is an actual study. 500% more productive when you are in your flow. When you are doing the work that makes you come alive, right?
Yes.
The work, what is it? I forgot who the author is, but don't ask me what the world needs. Ask me what makes me come alive, because what the world needs is more people to come alive. That's what you're trying to do as a leader. Is to get your staff to find their flow, to find the thing that makes them come alive, their zone of genius, as Gay Hendricks would talk about, right?
Yep.
The work they forget about time, because that's their best work. That's the innovation work.
Yes.
That's the work that's going to save your company when your company needs to evolve, right? It's going to come from that random person, maybe even an entry-level person that's like, I have an idea. And if you have a psychologically safe space, that person's going to share. If you don't, they're going to hold on to it, and they'll do it on their own.
And they'll go create Zoom.
Or exactly.
They'll just leave. I have a resource called the Joyosity Explorer map that helps people just start down that path, because sometimes it's like, we don't recognize our own magic. Like we don't, it's hard sometimes to see our zone of genius or what brings us joy, because it's just our normal. Like, isn't this just what everybody does?
Yeah, like everyone's good at this. Right,
everyone's good at this. And, or people compliment us on that thing, and we kind of, you as a leader just blow it off because you diminish it, not because you don't think it's necessarily important, but because you think it's so common.
Yes.
And so the map really helps people start to identify that. But I was doing it live, like really digging in with a client, and we had it on a whiteboard. And so we were sitting in this beautiful space overlooking the arch and overlooking Busch Stadium, and the atmosphere, like we did some movement things to unleash some stuff in her. And all of a sudden, like what brought her joy started to just flow. And what we got done in the next 5 minutes, like that 500% productivity, what we got done on that in the next 5 minutes was unbelievable.
Yes.
And it was because we had kind of incorporated a little play. We were in an atmosphere that was obviously safe, but also a little inspiring. And that productivity, she got into it. And what that has done as she has revamped the way she's leading and what she's doing is so powerful that sometimes I forget that that's part of my magic, because I'm like, doesn't everybody create this? But she was like, doesn't everybody do this? I was like, no, everybody does not create an event that requires these things that she was doing in the ag world. Like, not everybody does that. And
wait, can I add on to that?
Yeah, please.
Because I love this. So I needed to find this, but I just met this person, I don't know, like less than a week ago. Tracy Gee, she's an author, and in her book, a friend of mine sent me one of her pages, and in her book, she asked the question, what if what you want actually wants you back?
Yes.
And then later on, she's like, if what you want actually wants you back, there's not just disappointment, but also abundance in your desires. So this whole idea of like, oh, I have flow work, or I have the work that I really love, but no one wants that, right? Or like, that's not needed at my company. No, what if someone really does want that? Yeah. What if what you do that you love, that you don't do that much at work, but you really want to do it more and you double down on it? What if that is what is going to be the most impactful thing for your organization in 2025? That's a thing worth exploring, right?
Absolutely.
And that curiosity is part of positive psychology. It celebrates, right? It practices that. It's challenging you to to not have this fixed mindset, but be open to all the growth opportunities, which also includes failure, which also
Absolutely.
includes vulnerability, which also includes a lot of tough stuff. But that's where all of like the magic is.
Yeah.
And I think when I bring up play, I think when I bring up positive psychology, but more importantly, when I bring up play, people go, ew, play in the office? You mean forced fun?
Right.
No, I hate forced fun. I loathe
Nobody
it.
wants that.
If you put Samantha in a room with Chad, an escape room, they're not going to like each other when they go in, and they'll probably hate each other even more when they come out, right? Any team, I used to run team building events. I ran team building events for a decade. Team building events don't make your team closer. They reveal where they're at. That's really what they do. So I'm not talking about forced fun. I'm talking about you helping your staff tap into their zone of genius.
Yeah.
On their own time, right? So because the whole point of play is there's choice, right? I can choose not to play or to play. When someone's like, now we're going to all have fun at the same time, that's forced fun.
Right.
But when you're like, what is the work where you forget about time? How do I help you do 5% more of that work? We're talking about 1 to 2 more hours. What impact could that have? And there's studies that actually show that this works, right?
Absolutely.
Google used to do the 20% rule where they would give their staff a fifth of their time to do whatever they wanted, as long as it had benefited Google. They did this at the beginning of Google, by the way. And what came out of that? Gmail, Google News, Google Earth, the foundations of Google came from play, right? Yeah. So many other organizations could do that, but they don't make the time for the play.
Well, no, it's because we're so obsessed with productivity and how we measure productivity. I think there's that part of it. And I think the other part is truly what brings us joy is vulnerable.
Yes.
And we are scared of that. Brene Brown says that joy is the most vulnerable emotion.
Yes.
And that vulnerability scares us into like, oh, I don't want to do this. And we also feel this weird kind of like, if I don't want to do that, am I not a team player? Or if I do want to do that, am I actually a nerd? Like these are the thoughts that come up. And when I was first hiring a team, I worked with a woman named Emily, and she's amazing, Emily Perone. And I was like having all kinds of stories. And she was like, why is this bothering you? And I was like, because I'm supposed to be the person that's willing to serve and put out the chairs. Like I'm supposed to be the person that's doing this. And I'm giving my grunt work to somebody else, and that feels wrong, or it feels bad. I had all kinds of stories around it. And she was like, what you find that takes you so much more time is somebody's A, livelihood, and B, their favorite thing in the world to do. And like, I mean, I knew that logically, but when Emily said that, I was like, oh, right. This is their favorite thing to do, even though it's not mine. And so that's where that vulnerability comes in. But when we worked that out, I was like, oh my God, please do this. Please start, and it's been huge for my own organization, my tiny little team. And that happens in your team too, as a leader. Every person who's listening, if you've got a small team, you can do that without the permission of the CEO. And if you are the CEO, please start doing it.
Right. Well, because it's amazing that we are so obsessed with productivity, but if you just figured out what people love to do, they would do that so much better than anybody else.
Exactly.
But instead, we're measuring out like how many hours is it going to take,
measuring mouse clicks,
and what's the ROI? Like you could just feel your soul being like sucked from you as you hear all of these data points that later on aren't really that helpful, right?
Yeah, totally.
So and this even ties in with productivity when it thinks of leaders, because you notice that, and I've talked about this way too much. There are so many leaders that were promoted because they were productive at the last job.
Right. And I talk about this all the time. Leaders. Totally. What if they were meant to flourish as that?
And they were meant to flourish as individual contributors. So so now we have, I think it's 82% of leaders, managers that are not trained or not trained well.
Right.
And that's why 1 in 3 people are just quitting, because they have bad leaders. And instead of someone that's like, hey, I love to lead. That's what I love to do. Right. the amount of teachers that left the teaching profession and became project managers and were phenomenal at it, right there, right? Exactly, because you were like, I manage kindergartners, I can manage these people, right?
Listen.
Like this is where we have to help people find their zone of genius, not just their zone of excellence, right? Because Gay Hendricks talks about how you have your zone of incompetence, things you suck at, zone of competence, things you're average at, zone of excellence, things you get
where
paid.
we get stuck.
Yeah, where we get stuck, things you get paid for that you're really good at, but you don't really like it. You just are like, this is what I'm good at. But zone of genius is the work where you forget about time, the work that you would do even if you weren't getting paid to do that, even though you should get paid.
Totally.
So how are we double downing on people's zone of genius? You do that, your organization is so much better for that.
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to have part 2 of this conversation. So we're going to take a little break, come back next week, because we're going to dig into how do we actually do this? So hang on, friends. So let me put my coach hat on for just a moment. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them what you're going to do. Check the show notes for all the links and connect with us on LinkedIn and all the other socials, or just, drop me an email at Jen with 2 N's at jenwhitmer.com. We want to keep this conversation going with you. I know your earballs have a lot coming at them, so thank you for listening to the Joyosity podcast and being a part of our community. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It helps more people join us in the movement to create positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.